Hello, welcome to People, Planet, Profit, a podcast by EarthUP, where we aim to help businesses and people like you simplify sustainability. EarthUP CEO Stephen Bay will be joined by experts, innovators, and lifelong adventurers to break down some of today's biggest topics affecting the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profits. What does a sick building do to your health? Why should corporations be invested in biodiversity? How can I help create better working conditions and happier employees at my company? We'll cover these questions and so much more in a candid conversation about reshaping work culture into a landscape that prioritizes people and planet without sacrificing profit. Our next episode starts right now.
Hey, it's Stephen Bay, CEO of EarthUP. Today we have architect and entrepreneur Melanie Corey-Ferrini joining us. Melanie is the founder of multiple companies in architecture, design, and CEA spaces. CEA is Controlled Environment Agriculture. We're going to learn about what nourishing spaces are, how to create them for employees, and some pretty crazy innovations in agriculture with vertical farming, hydroponics, and growing your own lettuce at the office. Thanks for chatting with us today, Melanie. I'm a newbie when it comes to the indoor agriculture scene, and I'm excited to learn from you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on the show. Well, as you indicated, I am an architect. I didn't start as an architect, though. I left home when I was 16. I had kids. I had a successful commercial real estate appraisal career. I started that when I was 19. So I guess I've always kind of been an entrepreneur at heart, but I was always drawn to the built environment and creating human and environmentally kind of centered spaces. I went back to school to become an architect. And after I became an architect, I always wanted to have my own firm. I worked for some large firms in Seattle, but then I decided after about 5 years of that, I started Dynamic Space in 2000. And about 2 months later, the dot-com bust started. And I was like, well, that was unfortunate. So I had to really think about how my own company had to be resilient and weather tough times. Through the years, I really had to understand different types of built environment. And really, I've always been drawn to sustainability and kind of the idea of nourishing spaces. And, what does nourishing spaces mean? It can mean a lot of different things. And so just really kind of focusing on what that means, especially in the corporate world, because I do a lot of corporate design, corporate food spaces, corporate workspaces that have nourishment in them. I've also been really involved in my community. So how do you connect community, sustainability, and the built environment? I think they're all tied together.
We're inside all the time. So if your place is nourishing, the place that you're indoors is nourishing, right? That can only be a good thing. Do you want to explain what you mean by nourishing spaces?
The last 10 years of my company, I've really focused on food-related spaces, food and beverage and food production, food retail. As I designed spaces with large corporate clients, their idea of nourishing spaces was, why don't you design our restaurant or our food hall or our 24-hour market? Yet when I was in design team meetings with the workspace architects and designers, there was a lot of overlap in other areas of the campus or the workplaces that were considered nourishing, we're having a meeting and we like to eat in our meeting. We're having our little quiet time in this cool space you designed off the corridor. I want some food and beverage there. So I got to really start to call it nourishing spaces and nourishing experiences. And we started to program those spaces in all areas of the campus. We just started to map all the areas that people would want to kind of be nourished. And it's not just food and beverage even. It's, they want to stand up and stretch. There's a wellness component to it, right? It's nourishment that includes wellness, your mind, your body. And so where are all the places on campus that you're doing that? And when you start to talk to people, it's everywhere. It's even the desk that you work at. It's not just the meeting space. So it really becomes a bigger conversation when people really start understanding that, and that becomes part of the company culture.
So how did Dynamic really lean into this for your guys' corporate clients?
I think it was the design teams and the corporate clients really started to hear this. And when HR was also in our meetings, they saw this as a benefit, a way to attract and retain employees, a way to make their company stand out differently. I think when they started to see things that way, they're like, oh, let's really figure out what nourishing space is for us, unique to our culture.
And I imagine that you guys probably found that these nourishing spaces increase productivity.
Yes, quite a bit. We did find that when they had the options, especially when they had more than just a cafe and a break area, but it was sprinkled throughout in a very thoughtful way, the employees wanted to stay there and work longer, which sounds bad, but in a lot of ways, it was like a social thing. Employees thought this is cool. I want to hang out here at my company. It's very social. Obviously, people that have families or other people that they want to come home to, some of these companies would allow those family members to come to work and join in after, say, 5 o'clock. And, it's like, oh, let's all have dinner together. So it was a real good benefit because people were happy.
Awesome. And so how does 314 DC fit into this whole equation?
So 314 DC came about after I launched the workshops that I've been doing. And it's really before architecture or design even takes place. It could even be before a space or building is developed. We're just trying to figure out when we find a space or a building that we want to develop, how might we plan this from a nourishing space, your workplaces, all of the components that you need to put in that building? How much square footage do we really need? And how should this be laid out? It also started to inform the clients about maybe where they wanted to have their building or their workspaces. It could be closer to outside restaurants because maybe people don't want to eat inside their building at lunch. Some people don't want to be inside their space all the time. There's a lot of different factors to think about before you design an actual space. So 314 came about because of that. It's just to focus on programming and planning.
Oh, so pre-construction programming and planning to make sure. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
So how has this changed during the pandemic, post-pandemic, kind of seeing what you're looking at moving forward with this landscape of office space?
It's a good question. It's still a little early to tell, but what we're starting to see is spaces that were in motion already before COVID being programmed and planned. They were put on hold, and then now they're starting to, maybe in the last 3 months, starting to come back and look at those programs and plans, in that maybe there's a hybrid model for, working at home and working at the office. And what does that look like for square footage that the facility had? If people aren't coming back to work, what are we going to do with all that other square footage, right? So kind of talking through some of those scenarios, whether they bring in other companies and they sublease and there's some co-tenant ideas, or some of this indoor farming that we've been talking about, or some other aspects to it. It's definitely a question that a lot of commercial real estate investors are not sure about.
Yeah. Lots of unknown on the corporate office space landscape. So does 314 DC really help companies identify how to come back? Do their employees want to come back? What's the mix of office space versus work from home?
We do that with the rest of the team, but we always definitely put the lens of the nourishing space, the benefits that is for a company to retain and attract, to really look at their culture again. They should be updating their culture. I think people should be doing it maybe every quarter until things start to get back to whatever a new normal is. I mean, none of us knows what that's going to be, but I think we need to kind of revisit the company culture and talk to your employees and see how they're feeling about working from home versus at the office. Some people love it, some people don't like it. Before COVID, there was this whole commercial design of spaces is very high, like psychology of how people work. There's all different kind of personas in how people work. Some people like very focused space. Some people like very open space. And that doesn't change when you're working at home. That's your personality. So how do you accommodate those personalities now when you work at home? Which, some people are fortunate enough to have a separate office space in their house, but some people have to work at their dining room tables. And that's not ideal for some people. So I think companies are going to have to maybe have a budget for maybe some consultants that come and help people at their home, or kind of talk that through so it helps people. Because I'm already getting people asking me to help them with their house, their home office. What can we do to this? And they want to add on space. It's like, that's a whole nother business, but I'm not starting another business.
Come on, Melanie. Come on.
I told my husband's like, you're not starting another business.
One of the questions I had for you, you kind of already started hitting on this. I know that you do workshops and design workshops. Mm-hmm. Have you started to migrate some of the approaches to helping people solve these problems if they're working from home?
That question comes up quite a bit. The HR departments hear a lot of this. People aren't comfortable at home. Another big topic in the commercial building industry is, think about when you're working from home. One of the things that are so ideal during times of COVID is you can open up your windows, put on a fan, and circulate the air, and you're getting some good air exchange, which is important, not only during COVID, but frankly, it's very good for your wellness anyway, to have fresh air. Now, when you're in a commercial building, codes are very restrictive of operable windows. It's very hard to have operable windows in a commercial building, though it can be done for sure. The tenant or the building owner needs to kind of push on that. And we're hearing a lot more of that. So that's kind of one of those reverse things of working from home that's kind of pushed the commercial design of buildings to say, we want operable windows. How can we do that? We want actual air, not mechanical air that's being pushed through. And that's also part of the CEA. So it's a funny time where there's some lessons that are being learned from homes now that are going into commercial, not just the other way around.
I think that's great. I think there needs to be both ways too. There should be lessons from commercial buildings, right? Commercial buildings have managers. They have people that are dedicated to make sure that they're healthy, productive workspaces. And I'm a big proponent of work from home. I think work from home gives flexibility and enables companies to be more successful and resilient in the long run. But you can't do it blindly. You have to address the concerns of the employees. Maybe we can have more air brought in. The existing air situation in office spaces is usually set at the minimum.
Yeah.
It's not hard to just up that. And it doesn't really have a big impact on the energy consumption either to do those things.
Exactly.
I think that that's great. I think that you're going to have more and more people push for these workshops around home office design. Are you guys kind of thinking of a hybrid approach now that you're moving forward?
Even before this happened, we were working hybrid approach. Our teams like that anyway. Our hybrid approach has been some actual office space, some co-working space, and some home office space. Because co-working spaces are often closer to your home, where your actual office space is not. So there's 3 levels that we've been working in already. So when COVID hit, this was not really anything different for the way we work. No pun intended there. But it is interesting to see how I think the workshops are going to need to be around, and they are around, just kind of that mind shift. It's helping people kind of reframe how they work and to help them with new solutions, whether it be in their home or a co-working space. Companies need to think about that because, companies are like, yay, people are going to work from home and the office. And you're like, well, maybe you might have to kind of give some budget for a co-working space because some people still like to not work out of their house. They don't want to feel like their house is their office. It's kind of that psychology. Yeah.
And people also collaborate sometimes better when they're around others.
Oh, yeah.
There is a need for these hybrid approaches. And I think it's great that you guys did this before the pandemic, which is we have office space. Co-working space is extremely important. Mm-hmm. So is home office space, right? Yeah. If you're, I think the companies that are going to lead into the future have all 3 of those elements addressed and have a strategy for all three of those different elements.
The strategy and the programming is so important. And it's not only important for culture. And when I say programming, that's not only the square footage and the activities, but it's all the day parts. So it's looking at, in the morning, most people like to work here. In the afternoon, most people like to work here. It's super important to think about that because it also affects your bottom line too. Because why have a whole bunch of extra space that's just not being used?
Building nourishing spaces is such a fascinating discussion, but I want to also make sure we pick your brain about CEA and the Indoor Farm Collaborative. Please teach us about what you've been doing in this space.
Well, when COVID hit, it was like, wow, my workload dipped quite a bit at the first quarter, I would say, because again, people weren't going to work. My restaurant clients, they all of a sudden, had to shut down. So it was time for me to evaluate kind of my own business. And I just observed the community. I just took in as much information as I could. And I just wanted to learn a whole bunch about sustainability with regard to a pandemic situation. How does that go together? Because I had done food spaces anyway, and some of my clients had indoor farming equipment that they weren't using. And I thought, what if we started an indoor farm program where these community groups could learn indoor farming, because that gives them another skill. Fair Start, that's here in the Seattle area, they train usually homeless or incarcerated people to go into the hospitality industry. Well, obviously there weren't a lot of jobs. So I said, well, what if they could also learn indoor farming, which goes with the restaurant industry anyway. Fast forward to today, and we have this indoor training for adults and for high school. And we have a collaborative of more people that are interested. It's a growing industry. I'm on now an international association called the Farm Tech Society. It's interesting to me that there's no certification in indoor farming. I used to be an appraiser, as I mentioned. I'm an architect. And over the years, I've seen so much vacant space just sit for months on end. Why can't we grow things in that space? We could just grow it. And these things are movable too, some of these things. So even if we just had a temporary lease to grow things, just imagine if we had a whole bunch of that at the beginning of COVID, when people couldn't get, some of their grocery items, their produce and their greens, they could have just gone next door and said, here, I'm going to harvest, my little indoor farm, and now I'm good. It's just so crazy to me. And there's also some climate conversations that benefit that as well. I think it's the next level of things like LEED and the well building. It's kind of pushing that bar up more. Let's feed the people that are in the building and within our block or something,
I can see your brain turning like, is Melanie going to go create a certification process now? Is that?
I was talking to somebody with Washington Agriculture yesterday, and I popped the question. I'm like, we should have a certification and they're like, that's a good idea. So who knows where it's going to go.
So explain a little bit more about indoor farming. What's the potential? How much space do you need? Does it create other humidity issues inside the space? If you're a landlord and you have open space, why would they say, sure, Melanie, come in here and start growing stuff? What's the benefit, and how does the whole process work?
Good question. And we've had this question a lot. So the space that we went into is an old industrial space. So the air exchange was not that great. But what it did have was some operable windows. Indoor farming is soilless. So you have to think of no soil. So it's hydroponics, it's aeroponics, and it's aquaponics. Generally, we see hydroponics and aeroponics. And so it's soilless, which means little to no pests. Ideally, there's no pests at all. You can do some floor fans. That's on a small level farm. That's like some of the occupants are helping to harvest. You're not selling commercially. It's like some of the urban farms that you've seen outdoors. It's really just feeding the occupants, and that's what it's doing. So on a very big level, there's these huge commercial farms, and Calera Farms is on our advisory board, and they're coming into Washington, and they're building a whole new facility. These are big, very tall facilities that get into commercial growing. There's an ag tech component to it that gets into AI and robotics. So imagine too, you can grow 365 days a year, where our outdoor farms can only grow about 9 months out of the year. So it adds a lot of resilience to our community too. So one of our first adult training classes that we have come through is immigrant and refugee farmers. And they love farming in our region, but for about 3 or 4 months out of the year, they can't sell anything because they can't grow stuff. So they love this, that they get to add this to it.
And the problem you're addressing is massive. I was talking, I think it was with the director of sustainability for Orlando, and he was just sitting there talking about how many miles food travels to be on your plate.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I could be saying it's wrong, but every time you sit down and eat, it's about, for the average person in the United States, it's about 1,500 miles that the food has traveled to get to your plate. And so what you're trying to do is saying, hey, look, if we advance this technology and create these communities, that you can actually have it right in your backyard. You can go pick.
You can have it right here. Yeah. The one big thing you hear about indoor farming is that the high utility costs. Seattle happens to have one of the lowest electricity costs in the world. So it's like, why aren't we doing this? And we are learning more about shared systems. The developer that I chose to ask about donating space was Sabi Corp. They develop data centers. They're big energy hogs. And that's one of the downsides of a data center. But what if you could use the heat from that energy into the plants and have a shared space situation now? The building industry, I think, needs to start thinking like shared systems, shared space, how they can benefit each other. And that's part of the climate equation, and also feeding your community. I mean, you kind of get both. That's still being researched. That's not here and now yet.
When Amazon built their campus out in Seattle, they had so much energy generation, and I'm not sure if it was the servers, but they actually now are pumping from their campus hot air into other apartment buildings around to actually help heat the apartment buildings.
That's awesome.
Yeah, instead of just blowing it outside. Now, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm excited to hear about G2. This is a kiosk that grows for itself.
Yeah, so G2 is Greens and Grains. And it was this competition that was presented March of last year, which was early COVID. It's like, submit your ideas for the next pioneering and innovative restaurant concept. And I thought, well, this is an interesting time to come up with a new restaurant concept. So I was like, well, what would be an innovative at this time restaurant concept? So I thought, well, what if you could grow your own greens and have a low footprint concept, which commercial kitchens can be high energy users, but if you have certain, especially plant-based menus, are lower energy consumers just because less equipment. And if you could grow your greens that you're using right there, also that addresses that question you just mentioned about transportation too. You're not having these greens come in and out for so far away. They're fresher, they're more nutrient. So that's what I did. I designed this concept with another company out of the East Coast, and we kind of put this concept together and it won. So it was really designed for hotel lobbies and hotel retail spaces. But then a lot of people blew it up to like, oh, this could be an office building. This could be in a hospital. This could be its own standalone retail concept.
Aquaponics, hydroponics, aeroponics, are they as nutritious as other foods that are grown in soil?
There's a debate in the agricultural community, depending on where you research, where your Google kind of leads you. It is thought that because we're adding nutrients to the water quite a bit, and the density of nutrients is a lot higher in indoor farming, it is thought that indoor farming's greens are more nutritious than soil type farming. Most scientists would agree, but there's definitely still some debate.
So Melanie, as we look forward to the corporate sustainability landscape and at the working space in general, what are some of the things that you recommend when it comes to the home working space and the co-working space and the traditional office?
When we are talking about home office and co-working and office, I think there's a little bit of differences because your home office, you have to pay for things to get done unless a company starts giving you an allowance of something of some kind. But, when I go into the actual office building and when it's being remodeled, they're like, yeah, let's have sustainable materials and new systems. Let's go crazy, right? But in your own office at home, usually pretty frugal. Most people are like, well, I don't know if I want to redo my flooring to sustainable flooring. I don't know if I want to build a new wall. That's the trick. It's like, what are people willing to do? And if it becomes part of your culture to have a hybrid model, I think you need to have, as part of a benefits package for employees, that needs to be rethought. What is included in that benefits package? And maybe you still have the same amount of benefits package. Say it's $500 a month that your company's spending on your benefits. You get to choose from this kind of list of things that you want and that you need, out of that. Because maybe some people don't need as much health care, or maybe they want childcare, or maybe they want sustainable materials. It's kind of a greater list. More thought needs to be put, I think, into that if that's going to be part of your company culture. I think you're going to push employees away if you just create the hybrid model and be like, okay, you're on your own at home now, figure it out,
Which is kind of what everybody did for the pandemic, right? It's like, go home.
They did, because you didn't know how long it was going to last. Mm-hmm. But now that companies are starting to think this is going to be it for the long term, they should start really thinking about, different policies now.
And any recommendations on how these companies can create nourishing spaces for employees working from home?
There's so many creative ways they can do it. You can get food delivery that's super creative and fun. You could have a nourishing happy hour. You could actually have each employee have their own little indoor tower that they grow at their desk. And so during meetings or something, you could be, oh, look at all the greens I'm growing, and this is what I ate. And maybe some companies have their own home delivery van, and it has some fun branding that they're delivering to their employees at home. I mean, it can be a lot of really cool things that you were doing at the office anyway. It's just a different scale when you're doing it for people at home.
And it makes it fun. The ideas you suggested are great. Well, we're running out of time here, Melanie. So I'm going to jump into our quick hitter section where I'm going to ask you a question and you give us a quick answer. What gets you up in the morning?
Yoga and ideas.
I like that. What's the beverage you drink when you wake up?
Water and lemon first, and then 1 cappuccino.
Is there any new tech that you'd recommend? I know you mentioned those cool towers. Is
cool
there any
towers? I love those towers.
Is there any books that you would recommend for people listening on this space?
I'm not a huge book reader, actually. Food Tank is a great podcast that I love.
Perfect. I'm going to listen to some Food Tank. What's one recommendation that you would have for anybody who's listening in their daily routine that's probably eco-friendly that they didn't think of?
I'm always collecting my coffee mugs. So if you could take them with you, if you go order out, just always take it with you. It's harder to do now, I know, but some coffee places are allowing that right now.
Let's hope they allow more of it too.
Yeah.
Melanie, today was extremely educational for me and I hope for the listeners. Thank you for spending time with us today, and I hope we do it again soon.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I appreciate it. Thanks.
And that's our episode. If you'd like more info about what Melanie is doing or to schedule a consult, visit 314dc.com. That's the numbers 314dc.com. EarthUP's new platform that simplifies sustainability for companies and communities is now live. To jump into the platform and start making change at home and work, go to app.earthup.eco. Become an early adopter and help us create an easier, more effective, and more fun platform for our community. Thank you so much for listening in and for your support. If you like our show, hit that subscribe button, tell a friend, and rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Your support helps us reach a wider audience, so thank you. To learn more about EarthUP and our journey to simplifying sustainability, visit earthup.eco and follow EarthUP on LinkedIn.